interview of our finalists for Superintendency of State Board of Education. Go ahead. We'll gather the board here, and for those who are just joining us, we're doing the same thing we've done for the prior two conversations. We're going to have our board members in turn ask a series of questions that are more specific to each of the candidates as we've learned about them, and happy to explore continuing issues around their abilities, interests, and opportunity to be superintendent. So thank you very much. We're going to be joined in a moment, and we're being joined right now by Scott Menzel, who's Washtenaw Intermediate School District Superintendent. Scott, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Let me say first, thank you very much for being a candidate, for putting yourself forward, and to be part of this very public but important discussion of how we help identify the person who can help us lead our state and work together to improve educational outcomes. So you probably have heard what we're doing in this set of interviews, which include asking some questions about your strengths and abilities, which we have obviously heard a lot about from many people, including some in this room. And I just want to acknowledge the presence of Representatives Irwin, Rutledge, and Zemke as elected officials who have joined us here. We're also going to be asking questions about concerns, issues that have been raised that we want to understand better in terms of their impact on your ability to help us get where we need to go in education in Michigan. And we're going to ask about a range of education issues and management issues that, as you can appreciate, so you can explore your opportunity and abilities you have to offer in terms of our goal of what we are looking for in the next superintendent. So thank you very much. I'm going to start it off, and I've been the one asking some of the tough questions, so here's another one. Credible educators who worked alongside and for you to describe a pattern of making perhaps key decisions and advancing innovations, which you're well noted for, including particularly the IPSI Willow Run consolidation and some of the initiatives at Washtenaw Intermediate School District that have been more about enhancing your own ambitions and perhaps your candidacy for superintendency versus real attention and ability to follow through and ensure that they aren't leaving schools, educators, and students worse off than before. And how would you respond to that kind of critique?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to address that question, John. And I'll talk about the Ypsilanti and Willow Run consolidation because that's the one specifically that was brought up. And if you go back in history, when I applied for and was selected to serve as the superintendent at Washtenaw ISD, the June before I started, I was invited to a meeting by the president of the Ypsilanti Public School Board of Education and the Willow Run School Board of Education to talk about the role that WISD might be able to play. Both districts were deficit districts, Willow Run since 2005, 6 school year, and Ypsilanti since 2009-10. So they were underwater, they were struggling academically, and they knew they needed to do something. So they invited me to a meeting along with the interim superintendent of WISD and said, would you, as a credible third party, convene a conversation between our two districts? The history between Ypsilanti and Willow Run is one of competition and not always one that would be collegial in nature, and they needed a third party to facilitate the conversation. So we were approached at WISD by them. It wasn't that we approached them, and the initial conversations weren't focused around consolidation. The initial conversations were focused around what can we do together to address the financial concerns that we have. We put together a committee comprised of leaders in both districts, administrators, teachers union, and also some from the community to talk about what those things might be. It was during the course of those conversations where they started identifying a few of the small things that they could be doing. They realized that we're tinkering at the margins. We've got two major problems going on here. One, all of the savings that we can realize through shared services are incremental at best, and they're not going to dig us out of the holes that we're in. And secondly, and most importantly, they're not going to address the achievement issues. And it was at that point that the members of the Collaboration and Communication Committee, the task force that was put together by the two boards jointly, they decided we need to move from a conversation about shared services to one of consolidating the districts. Our job at WISD, not only mine but that of my team, was to help facilitate those conversations, to really work with the community to identify what their hopes and aspirations were for their children. I think people knew that it wasn't working. At the same time, we had an emergency manager law in effect that in all likelihood would have resulted in Ypsilanti and Willow Run having someone appointed to take over their operations because they weren't making progress in their deficit elimination plans. So you put those things together, they converge at the same time. We happen to be in a place at WISD to help facilitate that conversation and to give voice to what the hopes and aspirations were of the people in the community. The fact that I was in that chair and had the opportunity to help facilitate that conversation was not driven in any way by personal aspirations. It was driven by a commitment to the children in the school district. There were 4,500 students at the time that Ypsilanti Community Schools started, but there were 7,500 school-aged children residing within the boundaries of the two districts. Over a period of a decade, 3,300 students were school choicing out to other options because they didn't have what they were looking for. And we believe firmly at WISD, and I believe passionately, that we need to have high-quality public education experiences and opportunities for every student. And the consolidation gave us an opportunity to hit the reset button, to work with the community, to really reinvent the district from the ground up. And that was
let me interrupt and ask you a follow-up, because as
Sure.
that needed, perhaps in consolidation discussion continued, there's been a very, I think, credible suggestion that, different from what you said the other day, that it was you that engineered your own appointment as the superintendent. It was not the idea of your other partners, that you had your Washington Intermediate Board appoint the first integrated governance body, contract with you to provide half-time superintendent services when what perhaps was needed was a full-time superintendent who would work effectively and relentlessly at this incredibly difficult challenge of integrating curriculum staffs and communities, and that the result has been a lack of support and diminished education and really a spiraling downward consolidation. What would you suggest? Is that true? Did you engineer this superintendency for yourself, and has that been the result?
So it was never the intent that I would be the dual superintendent of YCS. When we went through the process, it was very clear on the front end that everyone in the district was going to have to apply for their jobs. And the district, the board, just to be clear on state statute, is that when a consolidation takes place like this, the intermediate school district is responsible for appointing a board that governs until the next regularly scheduled election. We had 18 individuals who applied. The WISD board appointed 7. 3 were formerly board members in Willow Run and or Ypsi, and then 4 were not part of either district in terms of serving on the board, because the community said loud and clear when we had the public process in terms of board appointment that we voted for change. We didn't vote for the same. And so my board appointed 4 new board members and 3 that had been on the prior boards because we needed to have some continuity. That board selected Michigan Leadership Institute to conduct a search. There were 3 individuals who were interviewed for the position. And if you go back and just read the media accounts, you'll see very quickly that there were all sorts of issues that were raised with respect to the 3 candidates. And the board decided that they weren't in a position to be able to give that superintendency to any one of the 3 and still have confidence that the district would get off the ground successfully. The search firm talked with them about going out externally, posting and seeing who we could recruit to come into Ypsilanti. The problem is that with all 7 seats on the ballot in November of 2014, it was really difficult to envision that someone would take a professional chance for 18 months, that they would relocate to Ypsilanti and take on that challenge. So in that deliberation, the other option that was discussed was this notion that you can contract with an ISD for superintendent services. What I would have preferred is that they contract with WISD and we hire someone full-time to do it. What was asked for by the YCS board at the table was that I be the person doing it because I was the person who had credibility in the community because of what we led in terms of a consolidation effort. 61% of the voters in both communities said yes. And so we agreed to that reluctantly. When we negotiated that contract, it was between the board members from YCS and my ISD board. It was agreed that that would be for 1 year. And that if they wanted WISD to provide that service for a second year, that we would have to hire someone full-time. The intent was only to be able to make sure that the new district got off the ground successfully. And so that it took a toll on my family. It was very hard work, but the intent was to make sure that it didn't fall apart before it ever started.
Last follow-up just on this topic. There's also innovations at the ISD level of regional transportation and high school choice consortia and business services that some of your customers and some of your school districts pulling out of the transportation consortia, pulling out of the high school consortia, and suggesting the business services that used to work well are sending checks all over town. Why are your constituent communities pulling out of the consortias? They say it's because they're not performing well.
Well, if you look at the achievement results for the Washtenaw International High School, and if you look at the achievement results for the Early College Alliance, I don't think that the data will support a question about whether or not they're working well, because quite frankly, they're performing at the top level of any high school options that are offered in Washtenaw County. The Washtenaw Alliance for Virtual Education is a program that's designed to try to address the needs of at-risk students, and we've recently retooled that opportunity. None of the partners, John, have actually pulled out of the consortium. There are some who have limited the number of students that are going into the consortium, but there isn't one that's pulled out. And so I think that we have to clear the record there. When it comes to the Transportation Consortium, that was a 5-year contract. As I mentioned in my first interview, WISD did not have any core capacity to operate a transportation department. We didn't do it prior to the time that the shared service was enacted. So over the course of that 5 years, there were some things that were being developed and learned at WISD. If you look at what happened at the Livingston Educational Service Agency, where they had the core capacity, they're still providing that consolidated transportation service. So in Washtenaw, we didn't get to the point where that became something that had the level of quality that the local districts wanted. And when we put in our bid, it was the high bid because we had to ensure that we were going to be able to deliver on the expectations of the customers. So I would argue that when you're prioritizing the work, since I started at WISD, we focused on the support of Ypsilanti and Willow Run, our districts most in distress. Secondly, we launched, at the request of the county, when they decided not to be the Head Start grantee, we worked on Head Start because early childhood is important. And that coupled with the Great Start Readiness expansion, took a tremendous amount of time and energy because Washtenaw ISD also didn't have an early childhood department. When you put all of those things in context, the Transportation Consortium, while important, was one small piece where we didn't have the core competence. And over the time that we delivered that service, we never got authorization from the districts that were participating in the consortium to increase wages for the drivers. The request of us was to drive down the cost. So we complied with the request of the constituent districts. The result of that was we had a very difficult time attracting and retaining drivers.
Thank you. Cassandra.
So in the first interview, we had to ask all the same questions, and we weren't really able to dwell into things. So this is an opportunity for us to either revisit some of the answers that you had provided before or ask specific questions of you. So the one that I had when I was going through your cover letter, you indicated in the cover letter that will we take the bold steps necessary to ensure that our 1.5 million school-age children are prepared to succeed in a global economy, or will we continue to fight to preserve a system that served us well in the 20th century? So my question, actually it's a two-part question. One, what are the bold steps necessary? And two, what elements, if any, of the current system are worthy of preservation?
Thank you for the question. I'll start on the bold steps necessary. You know the data. We're not performing at a level that our children deserve and need in order to be successful and competitive in a global economy. So it really is about systemic school reform, and I mentioned in the first interview that it's not about taking any one of those components in isolation, but it's about looking at the entire system. And I think that means we have to look at governance. We have to look at how we're structured to deliver the service. We have to ask the question, are we operating as effectively and as efficiently as possible? We have to ask questions about, in the 21st century with the advances in technology, is the system that we have now meeting the needs of all of our students? I don't think it is. And so when I talk about bold reforms, it's about looking at all of those components. We know that we have to continue to invest and grow high-quality teachers in the classroom. They're absolutely essential to success for the system. But how those services are delivered, I think, is something that we really need to address. The notion, and I grew up in Hillsdale County, where we have 8 school districts and 6,100 students. And so I ask myself, when you think about the limited resources that we have available in our state, Can we continue to support 8 school districts, 8 superintendents, 6,100 students, fewer students than are in many of our school districts across the state? So for me, I think that's something that is controversial. Some people don't want to tackle that challenge. As you've seen in my career, I've been willing to tackle the challenge because I think it's important to invest the resources where it makes the most difference, and that's in the classroom. Investing in teachers, investing in the wraparound supports to help our students be successful. So that's what I meant by the bold reforms. Are we willing to go there? Are we willing to talk about things that people are uncomfortable talking about in order to do what's right for kids?
And what should be preserved?
What should be preserved? I think there are, it still has to be connected to the community, right? So this notion that 550 is the right number is a problem for me because I think we need to revisit that. But I also don't believe that if we impose the change on communities that it will be successful. That's why the consolidation effort, when you think about what's done, and we told people it'd be a rocky road. It's 3 to 5 years before things kind of settle. But it was their vision. It was their voice. It was the community, 61% of both who said, yes, we want to do this. So remember, that means 39% voted no. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be some opposition. But if we support our classroom teachers, if we support the connection with the community, if our schools reflect a commitment to excellence for every student, I think that's something that is worthy of protection. And the rest, I think, needs to be on the table for conversation to say, is it working?
Can I follow? So when you say governance, you're not talking about getting rid of publicly elected school boards.
No.
You're talking about at the district level or ISD level perhaps and combining.
Right, I'm talking about how we're structured to ensure that the system is aligned, that the resources are best used to advance achievement.
Okay.
Thanks. Michelle?
Forgive me for asking a question that I probably should know the answer to, but it's been told to me that when there is consolidation, that all the collective bargaining contracts are voided. So with that, I wanted, and I'm told that this is a big impediment for a lot of people to support consolidations. Would you change that so that the contracts would not be voided, or would you promote that?
So it's a nuanced answer. Thank you for the question, and it's one that came up several times during the process. And I want to say 2 things, Michelle. One is, in consolidation, that's true. In an annexation situation, it's not true. So the district annexing another district, their collective bargaining agreement controls, and so you don't lose the bargaining agreement there. And I think we probably need to have a robust conversation about the pros and cons of annexation versus consolidation. And you do have a way with annexation to maintain the collective bargaining agreement of the annexing district. With respect to what happened in Ypsi and Willow Run, because the districts have contracts that were different in some really significant ways, I think it made sense to have that closed down and bargain a new contract. One of the things that we tried to be sensitive to in the process is to have conversations with the unions about what was important. At the same time, the districts were underwater, and this was an opportunity to hit the reset button. And for me, consolidation really makes the most sense if you need to hit the reset button, if you need to restart where a district is and build it from the ground up again. And so I thought this was actually an advantage in the consolidation. It created a lot of angst and frustration, and I understand that. We tried very hard to address some of the core components around the issues of compensation, for example. So we committed that no one would go backwards moving from their former districts to this one. We learned during the process that because of the 13% pay cut that they had taken in Ypsilanti, that disadvantaged the Ypsilanti teachers differently than the Willow Run teachers. So again, as we were building it as we go, we've learned some things that we would share with others about how you could perhaps approach that so that it was equitable. I think the relationship with the unions on the front end is important. We had that. We had conversations on an ongoing basis. So I think there's a way around the angst that's a result of the agreements ending, but still recognizing the importance of developing a collective bargaining agreement that will work for the new district. We at YCS, the board voluntarily recognized MEA. They were both MEA units, but that was one of the first orders of business on the first day that the district started, is to say, look, we know that that's the bargaining agent. We're going to sit down and negotiate immediately to put something in place.
If I could ask just
Quick.
okay. So recently, there was another attempt to consolidate or to get the communities to consolidate with Ann Arbor and.
Right, the annexation,
Yeah.
Whitmore Lake, right.
Whitmore Lake. What did you do to prevent that from failing, and why did it fail?
So I think there are a couple of things that are really important to understand about that. If you look at the Ipsy-Willow Run conversation, there was a 17-month lead into the vote.
Right.
So we had time. Additionally, it wasn't a new concept for the two communities. That had been discussed a decade before. Why do we have 3 districts operating within the Ypsilanti zip codes? And so it wasn't a shock. The annexation between Ann Arbor and Whitmore Lake was something that wasn't on the radar screen. People didn't know about, and we had this really hyper-compressed timeline from July 30th when they voted to put it on the ballot to the November issue. That, combined with the fact that it was going to be a mutual assumption of debt, created enough questions in the minds of people about what's the benefit and what's the return on investment if we agree to do this for Ann Arbor. And we didn't have sufficient amount of time to really lay the groundwork to get to success. So I think in large part it was a product of time. Quite frankly, it was the best way to leverage more operational dollars because Ann Arbor, as an out-of-formula district, was bringing in $9,100 per student. Whitmore Lake's at the bottom of the foundation grant. All those kids in Whitmore Lake would have moved up to the Ann Arbor Foundation or very close to it. We need some additional incentives in statute, and we've been working with our elected officials to be able to do that. But that was the other thing. The community didn't want to take the chance that the elected officials might come through. So we really need legislation in advance of putting the question of annexation on a future ballot because the maybe just wasn't enough to yield confidence of the voters.
Thank you.
Richard?
I seem to recall that you spoke very eloquently of the moral imperative of equity, and yet, not everyone can become a brain surgeon. It may take one individual 3 times as long to become an engineer as another, and then that person's professional life is accordingly shorter, and productivity is shorter. It seems to me that we are limited as to how much of human inequity or human difference can be overcome. And the other limit, it seems to me, is funding available. Our available funds for any good purpose is limited. So how do we come to terms with these limits? On the one hand, with the limits to human potential on the one hand, and on the other hand is the limits to the financial resources that we have. Some have argued that we should put our financial resources into our best students so that we produce the most benefit for society, and others have argued from the perspective of equity we should put most of our resources into the weakest students where we might not see the return or commensurate return. How do we make these difficult decisions?
Well, thank you for the question, and it reminds me of one of the things that I had hoped to say in the first interview, and then, there's all sorts of things you have that you think about, and after you drive home, it's like, I wish I would have said that. So one of the things, when you're looking at that equity versus equality question in the slide that I put up, there's another slide that should be there that's not, and that is where kids are now. Who already has the assets, right? There are a lot of kids walking through the door that have tremendous assets. And so when we think about where we need to go as a society, I'm still passionate about that equity issue in terms of how we invest our resources, because no child gets to choose their parent, their zip code, their gender, their race. That's all a circumstance of birth, but every child has immeasurable value and worth, and we've got to unlock their potential. Part of the problem with the way the question's framed is that we don't know what that potential is. And so that's the purpose of public education, is to unlock the potential. Now, I think we get into an argument that's a problem, and this is what I wish I would have said at the first interview, and that is when we look at the achievement gap, language that I wish we could eliminate, we're comparing the top-performing, high-flying students with the lower-performing students. And that gap will persist because we don't want to put a lid on how high the high flyers can fly. So we should be looking at those standards that we establish. let's measure our progress vis-a-vis the standards, not against the high flyers and the low performers. If we've set high standards and they're rigorous, then what our goal is to make sure that every student's achieving those. And while we might have some who don't, that's got to be our objective, is to really make sure we're achieving that standard rather than focusing on how, where the high flyers are compared to some of the ones that are struggling.
May I ask, is our present standards, for example, our social studies standards, we're only got about 27 or 29% of our students who are meeting those objectives. Are the standards that we have now, are they adequate for that purpose?
I think it's a fair question, and for me, I would want to go back and make sure that as we're having this conversation with the professionals in the field and looking at what best practices, not only in this country but across the globe, that we've set the bar at the right spot. I think we've made progress in our standards. I think Michigan has set high standards, making sure that we've got the right ones and that we then have a sense of continuity, because every time you move the bar, it becomes a problem. So I think we're close to getting to the point where we can hang our hat on something.
Thank you. I mean, Karen McPhee is here, but she has been not asking questions on her own suggestion to save time, so just so you know that.
It's important, Scott, that the board has as many questions as possible, and I know they have long lists of questions.
Okay.
Since they will be the ones making the choice, I want to acquiesce to their time.
Thank you.
Scott, what K-12 education differences do you see between Livingston and Washtenaw counties and other parts of the state? What exposure have you had to education in different parts of our state and outside? And what does this suggest for any actions that you would take as superintendent?
So 3 parts, Livingston and Washtenaw,
And the rest of the state?
rest of the state, and what was the third part?
The second part is, have you had exposure to education in different parts of the state and outside the state? And what does that exposure suggest for actions that you would take as superintendent?
Okay, thank you. So I'm sure it's no surprise to all of you that Livingston County and Washtenaw County are like kind of polar opposites as it relates to a number of things. First, their politics. One's extremely conservative and one has a reputation for being pretty liberal. Some of the other things that stand out as differences between the two, Livingston County, for the decade before I got there, was the fastest growing county in Michigan. It's relatively affluent, 5 local districts, 27,000 students probably now, and very homogeneous. Not a lot of diversity, there is some poverty. In Washtenaw County, we've got just under 50,000 students in the county, and we're very diverse. I mean, we have small school districts like Whitmore Lake in Manchester, and then we've got a university district in Ann Arbor with almost 17,000 students. So the differences are pretty significant in terms of the challenges that they face. They're all operating in both counties in a school of choice environment where they're competing for kids because their economic engine is driven by the number of students that they have. Both counties were hit pretty hard by the recession in 2008, and as we were bleeding students, districts were struggling financially. So in both counties, we've dealt with districts that were deficit. Brighton was the first one in Livingston, followed by Pinckney. In Washtenaw County, it was Little Run, then Ypsilanti, and then Lincoln. We have other districts that are sitting on the cliff. So the financial challenges are somewhat common. When you think about the rest of the state, we know that there are 51, the number varies in terms of the number of deficit districts, but a lot of struggling districts, sometimes driven by declining enrollment, sometimes by budgetary decisions, sometimes because of the competition in the marketplace, they're not able to attract and retain students. So there are a lot of different variables that drive districts to that position. My exposure to the rest of the state comes in a couple of ways. One, because I co-chair the MAISA Early Childhood Committee, and we've got representation from all the regions of the state, I have an opportunity to interface with colleagues on early childhood, and that's both superintendents as well as frontline administrators in early childhood. And we meet monthly and have those kinds of conversations. I've also been fortunate enough to serve on the legislative committee for MAISA. I've not done it since the Ypsilanti Willow Run consolidation, but I did it before. So I built relationships with people around the state and have had because of the consolidation work as well as the early childhood, had a number of colleagues contact me on those type of issues. So Bruce Mail in Gogebic, Ontonagon, and Wendy Wormuth up in Dickinson Iron contacted me about consolidation questions because they're both dealing with those things. And so I've had that opportunity to provide my experience and insight into what the legislation says and the process that we use, hopefully to provide some assistance to them. And I think that that's an important part of what the state superintendent does and what the Michigan Department of Education should be doing in supporting our locals.
Thanks.
Kathy?
Thank you. Hello, Scott. I wanted to follow up on the content standards question. Michigan developed its own content expectations, and then we the board adopted the Common Core quite a few years ago now. And I wondered what your view of that is. Then I want to follow that up with some follow-up questions about other part of the curriculum and content.
So I supported the adoption of the new, what we'll call the Michigan College and Career Readiness Standards, formerly known as Common Core. But I think that was the right thing to do. I think what we're talking about is having rigorous standards that are comparable across the states, and I think there are tremendous advantages to being able to do that. And so notwithstanding some of the objections that we've received, I think that we've moved in the right direction, and I think we need to maintain high standards. Does that mean that there isn't some tweaking that needs to be done? I wouldn't close the door on continued conversation about did we get it just right, or does it need some additional modification? But at its core, I think we did the right thing.
Okay, well, I agree. I think we did the right thing, too. And whatever we call them, they were high standards.
Was the right answer.
But that was just for math and English language arts. So I'm also concerned about one of our strengths in Michigan and other places in the country is creativity. I had the privilege of going to China with some of our colleagues and some other educators under the auspices of MSU some years ago.
Right.
And we went to visit schools and we met with the officials. The basic question before, their kids were very good at taking tests. They drilled and they took tests and they were very successful. And then we're compared to their, since our kids don't do as well on the tests. Their question to us was, how do you teach creativity? Our kids are good at drilling, and they give them something else, they can't answer it. So what do you think about that area? How do we maintain that strength that we have? At the same time, they were stressing rigorous standards in math and science and English language arts, and I would add social studies and arts.
Well, I think it's a very good question, Kathleen, and it actually probably goes back to part of what Cassandra was saying, what we should never give up. What we have in terms of the arts in our educational process, whether it's performing arts, whether it's music, whether it's fine arts, visual, any of those things, they all support academic achievement. And so I don't see them in isolation as a separate kind of approach. And we mentioned the project in Ypsilanti Community Middle School with respect to dance math. There are a lot of projects going on where we use the arts to help students connect with those core content standards. And so I would never, ever want to give up our arts, and I think it's a significant mistake. And one of the concerns that was raised during the annexation process was that Whitmore Lake didn't have elementary art, and that's a problem. When our districts are so struggling for resources that you lose something as fundamental as art in the elementary, that's a problem. So I do believe that we should never lose the art standards, that creativity and innovation is a part of the DNA not only of Michigan but of the United States, and so that needs to be supported and nurtured.
Lupe.
Okay. Buenas tardes. How are you?
Good.
Do you understand the role of the department versus the role of locals or ISDs?
I believe I do.
Some sort of trick question, I think.
Okay. So please talk more about how you would improve growth from the state superintendent's chair when you would not have direct responsibility for local programming.
So I think that's a really good question, Lupe. And even when you move from a local district to an ISD, you begin to realize that you move from direct authority and accountability to actually leading through influence, helping to shape the path. In fact, I think about the book Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard, and the authors are Heath and Heath. And they talk about shaping the path. So helping to create an environment in which schools can be successful, that students can thrive. The Department of Education, through policy and administrative rules and regulations, can either help or hinder movement in terms of improving achievement. And so I think the real challenge is to figure out how the department, while meeting its compliance obligations with respect to federal funds and what the legislature here has said, how do we help shape a path that allows our local districts and ISDs to be successful? How do we shape a path so that they can actually flourish? That we give them the support necessary to meet the challenges of the current environment, both on a policy and financial basis. So for me, it's really about that support role and asking and reflecting on what it is that we do, the rules and regulations that we promulgate that either help or hinder improvement at the local level.
Pam?
So I do respect the fact that you read a lot, and good to see you back. When you were here the last time, you quoted from Why We Can't Wait, a writing from Martin Luther King Jr. And you talked about a sense of urgency of closing gaps in achievement. You also talked about how with the Ipsy and Willow Run, you talked about moving the needle for the state as well as a whole, as well as within those subpopulations. And again, Richard has asked this question about, how do we allow these students to soar and then possibly expect other students to accept that they may not be able to soar. So I just want you to elaborate a little bit more on that, because it seems like it was a little bit of a different answer than before.
So for me, it's high expectations for all students. And so that's why I wanted to talk about the standards, not comparing groups of students against each other. I think it was Dewey who said, what the best and wisest parent wants for their child, we should want for every child. And what I recognize is that kids come to school with all sorts of assets or challenges, depending on where they're coming from. And it's our obligation to provide the support necessary so they can soar. And for me, it's unconscionable in a country as affluent as ours that has the resources that we have, that for the last 50 years, the achievement gap continues to persist, that we haven't raised the level of achievement substantially. And so if you look at the data, the number of African-American men who are dropping out and ending up in prison, that's a problem. I think we have to put it on the table, and we have to do something about it. If you look at the Latino male graduation rate, which we talked about at the last meeting, those realities aren't acceptable to me. And I think that talking about closing the achievement gap is cheap. What we have to do is actually do the work. And we know what works. We know that students in poverty, we know that students of color can learn and achieve at higher levels if given the supports and resources necessary. So for me, that's the moral imperative. That's the urgency behind the work, because every, and I know this, I'm seeing Mike sitting there, it's been the frustration for so long because we're passionate about it. It's why I was so honored to be invited to serve on the Achievement Gap Critical Friends Work Group, because it is being focused on like a laser here, but the issues are systemic. And so it's not just what happens in schools, but it's what's happening in our communities. It's how we're responding to those social situations and dynamics. We're a part of that process, but there are a lot of other players that we need to engage with, the courts. That's why the school justice partnership is so important. Thinking through how we address these issues. It's causing me to remember the Solutions Not Suspensions pledge that we adopted in Ypsilanti. Right? We expel and suspend kids disproportionately, children of color and students with IEPs. And the numbers are really problematic because when you take a student out of the educational environment, they fall further behind. We set them on this path where they are never going to catch up. And so we have to find different ways of addressing the discipline challenges so that we're not denying students the access to the education they need in order to have a productive and meaningful life. So for me, there is a sense of urgency. The answer to Richard's question was we should be measuring against the high standards bar instead of, because this notion that you want to just put a lid on the high flyers and that'll take care of the gap. I think that's a false argument. I think we have to have high standards and work to ensure that all of our students achieve them.
Thanks, Pam. Scott, as we've talked, and certainly in this search process, we made it clear the board and the superintendent have to have a relationship of complete trust and great communication. that we need to be on a common page and work together in terms of advancing a policy agenda that is co-owned and co-developed by the board and the superintendent, that the superintendent cannot be unilaterally making policy. You have excellent relations across the aisle. We've heard a lot of that from people. That's fantastic. It may be a blessing or a curse that it was suggested that you were the governor's choice in this. The point is, how do we know, or what kind of reassurance can you give us that you would be working with and for the board, not working for multiple masters?
I think it's a good point, and I'm glad you asked the question, John. And I think the first thing is the best predictor of future success is past performance. And I think if you talk to former board members of mine, I know some of whom submitted letters, they'll talk to you about the relationship that I've built with the individual board members as well as the team as a whole. I'm not one to go out on a limb myself. I'm actually very skittish about walking out there without having some support and protection. So I didn't pursue the support of the Willow Run and Ipsy consolidation without having the WISD board say, yes, this is work that we support and we want you to be engaged in. All of the major challenges that I've been a part of and the things that we've taken on have been a product of the conversation of the board superintendent discussing what it is we need to accomplish. So for me, I would envision starting very quickly and building a relationship with each of you, getting to know who you are individually, what your passions are, what your concerns are. I've had the opportunity to review what your priorities for 2013 through 15 are. I get a sense of where that is. I get a sense of where your passion is. Should I be fortunate enough to be selected as the state superintendent, that's the relationship I want to nurture. And then I think we take the next step, and that is, as we're talking about where we go as a state, being very crystal clear on what that vision is for the future of public education in Michigan. And as the board, working with the superintendent, identify those strategies then to achieve that, my job is to help make it happen. But that vision, those policies, those requirements are something that get done collectively, not something that I would go off and do independently. And the state superintendent is hired by and reports to the State Board of Education, so I understand who I'm accountable to.
Thank you. Cassandra.
As you know, the governor signed an executive order last week which will essentially remove the reform office from the Department of Education and transfer it to the Department of Technology Management and Budget. And just yesterday, the State Board of Education unanimously approved a statement questioning the constitutionality of this move. Moving forward, what advice would you give to the State Board and other stakeholders on how best we navigate the situation towards better realizing everyone's goal of improving education for children in struggling schools?
So I did read the statement that was approved by the board yesterday. I was very disappointed when the EO came out because I was hopeful that the administration would allow the state superintendent and the board to have an opportunity to look at how that state school reform office could help address the issue of our bottom 5%. And so for me, and I have some ideas. I don't know that they're the right or best ideas, but I have some, and the notion that we don't have the opportunity to have that conversation internally was a concern. At the same time, I don't think it's the end of the road. I think you reach out to the administration and to the Department of Technology Management and Budget, because the expertise for how to do this educationally resides in the Department of Education, not in the Department of Technology Management and Budget. So notwithstanding the move, and I hope that the governor will be receptive to the request of the board to reconsider, but if that doesn't happen, I think we figure out how we build the relationship, because we have a vested interest in moving the needle for the kids that are in those schools in the bottom 5%. And again, it's that sense of urgency why we can't wait. So my advice is don't take any of those political actions as the last word. And if we're crystal clear on what our mission and purpose is, and we hold that firm, and that is it's about the kids, and it's always about the kids, and how do we improve achievement for them. We want to work with any partner that's willing to help us make that happen. And so if the nature of the conversation has changed because something has been shifted, then I think we learn how to navigate that in order to move the needle for those kids.
You mentioned that you had some ideas. Can you share any of them?
So for me, I'll share one. That's this, that we really need to be focused on how do we build capacity within communities. You've heard it before, and you know, there's no silver bullet in these schools. If there was a silver bullet, if it was easy, it would have been done already. It's not about easy work. It's about the really difficult work of rolling up our sleeves and getting in the community and addressing root cause issues in those districts. And sometimes it's a product of out-migration. Sometimes it's a product of, as the kids are leaving, the ones that are left don't have engaged parents. You've got all of these other variables and dynamics going on. In my mind, if we could deploy teams that would be assigned with some authority for a 3-year period of time, because I don't think anything less than 3 years works. I think it's too short. And if their focus is to build the capacity within the system so it can be sustained when they're gone, I think you could help create something that really does move the needle. Now, there are a lot of other policy questions that come into play that could undermine that, but for me, it's really about capacity building. How do we support those districts? The idea of taking a building out of a district, so the Ypsilanti Community Schools has two buildings on the list, the persistently low achieving list. If you just pull that building out of the district, you're creating another set of, I'll call them unintended consequences, and hopefully they're unintended, but they're probably negative in terms of how the whole system works, because the feeder system's into the middle school, and then the kids coming out of the middle school going to the high school, you've got to have alignment there. That's why I think having the department, having the State School Reform Office in the department, if you're going to build capacity, makes some sense. So that's just one idea.
Thank you. Michelle?
Okay. I actually wanted to ask 2 questions, but I don't know if I have time to ask both. So, one of them is with regard to special education, and your position on the 21 to 26 year old and the services that they get. I want to know, what innovative things have you done in Washtenaw County to address the needs of these special ed kids so that their college or career or whatever ready, given the very poor outcome in Michigan for these types of kids? We're like on the bottom 5 of the country when it comes to outcomes for special ed children. So what have you done that's been innovative to address the needs of that population, assuming that you support the continuation of this program?
Right.
And what would you do if you had more time, I guess?
So now you've given me an opportunity to give a handout. I mentioned this.
Don't give it to Eileen.
I mentioned this at the last meeting, and so I want to circulate it. This is our mid-year board goals report for WISD, and because sometimes visuals are more helpful. In the middle of so the first part, just so you know what I'm giving you, the first part is a narrative around the board goals for this year. The second half is a quantitative analysis with some nice infographics. And if you turn to page 2, you can see a snapshot of programs and services that we're providing. So page 2 of the infographic piece, so it looks like this.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a lot of infographics. Okay. Page 2. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, there's two
The second
page
page.
2s. We did these separately with our board, so we did the narrative story first and then the quantitative infographic. But the goal is to continue to develop knowledge, understanding, and optimal delivery of special education services throughout all facets of WISD. And we do a lot around professional development, building capacity, not only for our staff that are providing direct service, but also within the county. High Point is our school for students with high needs, so low incident, high needs populations. We've got 72 students in that building. What's nice about High Point is that it's co-located with the Honey Creek Charter School, so we have an opportunity for our students who are in High Point to interact with students grades K through 8 in that building. We actually believe that inclusion is really important and that students should be educated in their home district when and where possible. And when you don't have that possibility, something like High Point that's got a K-8 environment within it, we still allow them to be engaged with typically developing peers. Forest School is a county-based program that we operate for some kids with some significant behavior and mental health issues. And again, this is a last resort, not a first resort, but it's a really important service to our districts. WISD took over the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program, which used to be operated by Ann Arbor. This is our second year, and we've been going through a strategic planning process to really build cohesion in the team and take that program to the next level. And then the final one gets to your core question on young adult programs and young adult projects. So we've located our young adult services in the communities where students live. So we've got a building that's on a transit line in Dexter. We've got one in Chelsea. We've got a couple in Ypsilanti, a couple in Ann Arbor, in order to meet the needs of the 21 to 26 population. You can see that we have 42 young adults that have paid employment. We've got 14 that are involved in the Train Today, Work Tomorrow program because we're trying to build the skill sets that are necessary. 94 are currently in unpaid occupational training opportunities. One of the points of pride with our staff and for me as the superintendent is that our young adults will actually present at conferences about their experiences. And it's really exciting to see the diverse array of employment opportunities. We recently had a session that was held at WISD with support from our Chamber of Commerce to bring businesses in, the parents and the young adults, to talk about how this is a pool of reliable and talented individuals who have gifts and things to offer. And so we're trying to break down some barriers and stigmas so that people realize that young adults, that while they may have a label, they have a lot to offer and give. And so that's kind of been our focus, and we're continuing to work to build these opportunities for the students.
Just a follow-up question, if I could. So are these special ed students, including kids with autism, are they included in the CTE program in Washington County?
So we don't have one CTE program.
Are they included in any?
So yes, they are. At one point, a few years ago, we were cited for having a disproportionately high number of students with IEPs in the Career and Tech Ed program, but they are included. We actually have, I was looking through some of the numbers, I think we've got a handful of young adults with IEPs in a culinary arts program, so they are included in various CTE options.
Okay, so they're included with regular
Yes, they are.
education in the program.
Richard?
I wanted to ask your view of school choice. There's a range of opinions. Some that school choice is an absolute guarantee to families. There's some evidence that suggests that families empowered by choice, their students do better. And then there are others who feel that this is strictly subordinate to other factors. That parents may have to limit their choice so that the community school can provide the best overall program for the most number of students. What is your view of school choice and where it fits in the hierarchy of values as we make policy decisions?
I believe school choice is extraordinarily important. I think I mentioned in the first interview that my issue is not with choice, but it's with unconstrained choice and the quality of the choices. Right? So just having a ton of them doesn't mean that they're all good options. And for me, when we're thinking about the public investment in public education, those options need to be high quality. We know that choice existed before our school of choice law was adopted. Parents who had money could send their children to private schools, or they could send them to parochial schools. So choice did exist for some, but not for all. And what we need to be sure is that every student, every child, every family has a high-quality educational choice. And I think it shouldn't be dependent on your zip code or your ability to get there. And so figuring out how we provide the supports to make sure that they're high-quality choices and that we haven't undermined a system of quality public education by creating so many that, as you remember the CRC report, we have this demographic trend of fewer students, this rise in the number of options, and the differential in the foundation grant creating economic stress. So I think there's got to be a sweet spot somewhere where we can find constrained choice, but they all need to be quality.
Anything else, Richard? Okay. Great. You go ahead if you have a follow-up.
If a private entity can educate a child for, say, $1,000, and whereas the public entity, for whatever reasons, has to charge $8,000. Would it be in the public interest to utilize the private entity, have the job done inexpensively and possibly demonstrably higher quality?
Well, I think in the scenario, I would have to look at the specifics. I'm concerned about the privatization of public resources. And so that would definitely be a concern for me, but what I would want to learn in that example is what are the things that they're doing? How are they structured? If you're going to improve quality, so assuming that it's a higher quality, I would want to learn what they're doing so that we could implement that in the public environment. But I absolutely don't, I think we have to be very careful about using public resources to support private ventures.
Thanks. Eileen?
Thank you.
So I'm chewing on these answers. This is a long question, but there's only two, I'm sorry, this is a long statement with two questions
Okay.
afterwards on teacher preparation, teacher quality, okay?
Spirit of Dan.
Dan's here, in spirit. All our finalists have spoken about the importance of a need to improve teacher quality. Our teachers are educated in institutions authorized to prepare teachers by the state board, even though they're autonomous. Many teacher candidates are poorly prepared to teach and come from less successful academic backgrounds themselves. Many teachers are not mentored and supported well once they get in and are inducted, and they drop out of the profession. Active teachers need quality professional development and good evaluations to improve their craft. And here are the two questions. Where are the priorities in better preparing, supporting, and ensuring quality teaching? And what specifically would you do or encourage Michigan to do to improve teacher quality?
So repeat those again, just to make sure I'm
Yeah,
answering
I
the
know.
right question.
It's like an-
Priorities for?
Better preparing, supporting, and ensuring quality teaching. And what would you do or encourage others to do so Michigan can improve teacher quality?
So I've seen some of this already when the teacher prep programs in a couple institutions were closed down. So to be clear, I think it's really important to be very involved in that conversation to make sure that our teacher preparation programs are performing at a high quality level. I think we have, again, a systemic challenge. If you think about career options for students, and we've had this conversation at the Soups Table in Washtenaw, and many of us have kids that are in college or approaching college thinking about career options. And when you begin to talk about teaching, a starting teacher's salary at $35,000 to $38,000 a year, and 11 years later they might get to the top of the schedule, $65,000, $70,000 a year, compared to what they might be able to do with a math or science degree somewhere else, it makes it really difficult for us to attract and retain top talent, the best and the brightest to come into this profession. And I think if we look at what top performing states and nations do, they value the teaching profession. They actively recruit from the top academic performers, and then they compensate accordingly. So I think we're going to think about the system solution. I think that's the focus that we have to pursue. And I think if you have that, you're going to be able to get greater interest by people to look at it as a profession. And secondly, you can't then get to where we need to go without really having rigorous standards for those teacher prep institutions. So for me, they go hand in glove, but we're going to continue to struggle to find high-quality teachers, given how our current system is put in place. And quite frankly, we know that they're the key to being able to move the needle for kids. Teachers are absolutely critical. Outside of parents, who are the first and most important teacher for every child, it's about that classroom teacher. And when it comes to how do we support them, I think ongoing professional development, the high-quality evaluations are not, in my mind, ones that are designed to be punitive, although sometimes we need to move people out of the profession if they're not getting the job done. But it's really to help improve professional practice. And the world's changed. So if my professional preparation was 20 years ago and I've done no additional learning, I'm not really able to connect in the same kind of way with my kids. And I know that the best teachers are lifelong learners, and they're learning alongside their kids. I know that one of my best teachers in Whitmore Lake List, I think I heard her voice. I think she's here somewhere, if Jan Party's in the room. She's a lifelong learner as a national board certified teacher. This is what she brings to the table. And so it's our job to be able to provide those professional development opportunities so that they can be masters of their craft on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Well, a lot of my questions have been asked, and you've answered them already, but I would like to pursue a little bit more about the schools of choice. You talked about parental choice. Well, how do you see the role of cyber schools choice? And what do you think about vouchers for children to go to non-public schools?
So
They're two different questions.
Right, right. So let's tackle the cyber question first. I think that technology is an important tool. With our at-risk program, had launched something that was 24/7, 365 computer-based program. And what we learned in that process is that there may be some students who can thrive in that environment, but most students really need that adult interaction, mentoring, and support. So finding out the way to actually blend both cyber and actual instruction and adult interaction is kind of important. When you think about quality, for me, I want to ensure that in the cyber environment, it's not some fly-by-night organization that is promising X and delivering Y. So you think about the Michigan Virtual University, for example, and others who are doing it. If there's a quality standard, there's a role. I also don't think that a cyber school should get the same foundation grant as a brick and mortar school. The cost of operation is different. And if we're redirecting public resources to support a cyber venture, when that's not what it costs to educate a kid, that's a problem for me. So I think that there may be a role, but I want to be very careful about how that's configured. And again, quality is key. If parents sign up for it because they believe this is the answer for their kids and then they don't succeed, we've got to have some accountability mechanism built in. Vouchers are problematic. The voters in Michigan rejected them pretty significantly the last time it was on the ballot. I think with our school of choice policies as they are currently configured, parents really do have good choices. And so I don't think there's a need to go down the voucher route, and I would be concerned about, again, redirecting taxpayer resources to private interests.
Thank you.
Lupe?
Okay, Scott, if you're selected the superintendent this afternoon, what will your first 50 days look like?
So I think there are two really important things on the first 50 days. So I printed this out, thinking about our last meeting, and it's not a 50-day plan because I don't have one written. The first thing, you might recall that when I asked you what you thought the most important thing was, you all talked about relationships. Relationships with the board, relationships with the staff at the Michigan Department of Education, relationship with the administration, relationships with the legislature. So for me, it's really to begin that process of building relationships. And fortunately, while I have a number of really good and healthy relationships, there's a lot more work to be done. So that first 50 days is going to be about listening and learning and understanding. I don't presume to know all the issues and challenges within the department. I know a lot of people here, but it's foolish. I've never thought that when I walked into any job that I knew everything that needed to be known. I got to learn. And so it's about listening. Seek first to understand, then to be understood, in the words of Stephen Covey. The other thing that I think is really important, as I've reflected on kind of where we are, looking at your strategic plan, thinking about that May meeting where you're going to be talking about strategic priorities next, what we've done at WISD that has worked very well for us is not to start with the current reality, develop strategies, and then get to this core values, purpose, and vision. But we start with this hope and aspiration. What is it that we want for the children in the state of Michigan? What do we want public education to look like? And that needs to be a conversation with a diverse cross-sector of stakeholders. It's got to include the labor unions. I want to have meetings with Dave Hecker and Steve Cook, because that's important to sit down and talk with them. I want to meet with the business leaders of Michigan and Doug Rothwell, the Talent 2025 people, the nonprofit and foundation arena where they're investing in education. Let's have those conversations, but let's have a statewide conversation about what it is we want for our children so that we can have crystal clear vision and focus on the work that needs to be done. I think the pieces and parts are there, but let's get clarity around what that core common vision is, because what I see happening is everybody's got their own definition in their head, but we don't have a commonly agreed on vision for where we need to go. And Lupe, we're thinking about your granddaughter in kindergarten, right? We're talking about the educational experiences that she's going to have in order to be successful when she moves through our system. And so for me, I want to be part of this conversation so that the strategies that the board adopts and puts in place are the ones that get us to that vision. So to me, I want to have that conversation in the first 50 days coupled with listening to all of the key stakeholders that we've talked about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pam, you have another question?
Yes. So our goal is to help all Michigan young people to be prepared for college, career, and citizenship. There's more talk recently about career readiness. What more? So there's two questions. What more does Michigan need to do to support effective career readiness? And I know that you have some background with Michigan Works with this. And how does preparation for careers support or conflict with other goals for education?
Thank you for the question. And it is an area that I'm also passionate about. One of the things that stands out as a major issue of concern is that we do not have equity across the state in terms of providing career and technical education programs. 23 ISDs do not have a career and tech ed millage. And so in Washtenaw County, where we don't have one, our local districts put together consortium to deliver those services. And with a little bit of subsidy from the state and federal government, most of the funds come from the general fund of those local districts. If you compare that with a Branch or a Jackson County where they actually have a career and technical education millage, those students have access to robust and vibrant career and tech ed programs. So I would want to tackle the equity question in terms of the funding across the state and access. And I think there's multiple ways to get there, but we should also be, and we are in Washtenaw County, looking at how do we leverage the support of the community college, because they have fantastic facilities, and now we can talk about dual enrollment. We've done this with YCS. We opened a certified nurse assistant program in the high school of YCS in partnership with WCC, so they provide the staff. They had surplus demand, but not enough space, and so we were able to partner to put that on the campus, so it's a win-win. The 12 students who went through that program in the first semester this year all graduated, passed their certification exams. So I think that there are some creative ways to do it. And quite frankly, we don't ever want to lose the rigor. And if I go back to my school to work days, we were having the same conversations. Rigor, relevance, relationships. If we're going to really help students master the academic content, most of the students don't do that in an abstract environment where it's done on a board somewhere and conceptually have to figure it out. They do it with their hands. They have to touch and feel. So we have students who are exceptional at certain mathematical skills. They're CNC machine operators. If they're working in auto mechanics, which you have to have a high degree of computer tech skills in addition to what's going on with the car, right? So we have opportunities to really validate the importance of the skilled trades, the STEM opportunities for our students. And again, looking at the equity question, we have an I-3 grant to expand science, technology, engineering, and mathematics programming in Ypsilanti community schools. And part of the reason why we were selected to partner in this grant with Columbia University and Jobs for the Future was because of the diversity of our population. They were looking for a certain threshold in terms of socioeconomic status as well as racial diversity, so that we could really raise the bar for kids. And so I think that this is a conversation that needs a lot more thought and attention. In terms of competing priorities, again, it's why I say we need to talk about systemic school reform. We need to think cradle to career and look at all the resources we have and identify how we allocate those resources to achieve these objectives. And if there aren't enough resources at the end of the day, again, why I think the equity and adequacy study is important, then we make that case. But it's really sitting down and looking at the entire picture in order to be able to make the case.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any unasked burning questions?
Yeah. In your resume, you have a bullet point under related experience that says NCA certified teaching experience. What is that?
So as a non-traditional candidate that didn't come up through the ranks, one of the things that almost every superintendent posting had was teaching experience or meet the NCA teaching requirements. And so in order to be accredited, superintendent needed to have at least 2 years of teaching experience. And NCA determined that my teaching experience at Jackson Community College as an adjunct professor, as someone who facilitated a business education fellowship program for Spring Arbor University, I taught adult ed, those experiences met the threshold that NCA had established for district accreditation.
NCA standing for?
North Central Accreditation. So
Okay.
most
Sorry,
of our
I'm from the
districts,
higher ed world, so it means something completely different
Got
there.
it,
So I
got
just want to.
So most of our districts have some sort of NCA accreditation building or district level. In order to meet that standard, the superintendent needed to have at least 2 years of appropriate teaching experience, and I met that standard.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks, Scott. Is there anything else that you'd like to share in terms of your interest and abilities and commitment to help us all work together to improve education that you haven't had a chance to share, and anything you want to have us address about whether this is the fit for you in this job? Thank you.
So just a couple of concluding thoughts. One, this work is incredibly important, and I think that sense of urgency and the time that we have presently, it's on our watch, right? For me, I went home and I did watch your deliberations, by the way, after the last meeting, and I questioned, is this something really that I want to move forward with? This is a pretty difficult political environment. It's a lot of different challenges going on. And I had wise counsel who said, sleep on it. Don't make any rash decisions. So I did. I slept on it. When I woke up the next morning, I realized that the reason that I applied for this job hadn't changed one iota. That the 1.5 million children in this state need to have high-quality public education opportunities, and this is the place where we can impact that conversation and we can help make the change. I was thinking about, I don't know if you saw the movie Lincoln. It's a really nice movie. And there's a scene in that movie where the president is talking, I think it's Thaddeus Stevens, about the push, and the senator was pushing really hard to go to the extreme, do it all in one fell swoop. And Lincoln says to him, he said, a compass will tell you what's true north, right? We need to know what our true north is. But it's not going to identify for you where the swamps are or where the mountains are or any of the other obstacles in your path to getting there. And you need a map for that. For me, I think articulating the true north, being very clear what we want for our kids is absolutely critical. But the job of the state board is to really, in light of that true north, develop the map. Identify how we're going to get from where we are to where we need to go for our kids. And we have to do that now. And so for me, I'm very interested in partnering with you. This is never about me. And so what I want to say is that I'm really humbled and honored by the people here who came to support me, the people who've written letters, because this is a real honor to be sitting here. And quite frankly, in order to move the needle for kids, it's all of them. It's not about me. And we've got great people who care passionately about our kids in this state. And so I'm interested in continuing the work and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being willing to put yourself forward and also to go through the kind of public discussion of your person and your abilities and your experience, which is important but much appreciated, and thank you very much. So I would normally come down and shake hands, but we're going to move right into public participation.
Okay.
So thank you again, Scott, for
Appreciate it.
coming. So we do have some people that want to comment. So Marilyn has some forms. If we always have public participation in our public meetings, so now's the time to come forward for any issue, any topic, anything you want to say. We'll limit it to 3 minutes because we do have a number of people that wanted to speak. So please identify yourself. And Marilyn, who's our first?
Thank you. If there are any more forms, if you pass them forward, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Our first speaker is Dave Campbell. And while he's approaching the table, I will let you know that, as President Austin said, you each get 3 minutes. You'll sit at the end of the table. If you do have handouts, just pass them to the closest person, and they'll be glad to share them around the table. The board will not engage in a conversation with you. They'll just listen to what you have to say. So, Mr. Campbell, as soon as you're ready, we're ready.
Great. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name's Dave Campbell. I'm the superintendent of Kalamazoo RESA. Pleasure to be with you today. I know these 3 candidates well. You've chosen well. 3 great finalists. I'm familiar with their work. I know Scott really well because I was the superintendent of Livingston ESA after Scott. And so that always gives you an interesting perspective when you follow somebody. We always joke about cleaning up messes. We also get to see all the great things that they had in place. And I was really pleased today when I walked in, and I don't know if they're going to be speaking, but the 2 of the union co-presidents from Livingston ESA Professional Union are here as well to speak about his work. So I was going to speak to that, but I think they can do that more effectively than I can. All I know is a very high bar set at Livingston ESA, a very high level of collaboration with the employee groups, with the 7 unions there. And I had to hit the ground running because it was an organization that was focused. It was an organization that had a mission. It was an organization that had a mission that was delivered and constructed together. The board owned the mission. And it was a challenge as a new person coming in because the mission was moving, and I got to keep up. I'm the new guy coming in. And the level of board ownership was just really impressive, and it has continued. I've continued my contact with Washtenaw Intermediate School District because Livingston and Washtenaw have done so much together, and the level of ownership on the Washtenaw board. And I believe if Greg is speaking behind me, he may speak to that obviously far more detailed than I could. When I looked at your job description a couple of months ago, I was excited, absolutely excited that what you had developed and what you'd created there. And when I read it, I thought, that's Scott. It's the skill set. His set of skills matches the job description really well. And when you think about all the politics and everything that you have to consider, which I understand, it really comes down to what's the skill set that you're looking for, and you developed that a couple of months ago. And which of these candidates matches that job description the best? No one's going to be perfect. No one's going to be perfect. But who's got that set of skills? And I would argue, knowing the three, that it would be Scott. Though the others, they're great people and they're great leaders. But it's about a set of skills and the set that's needed now, at this time in history, this defining moment. We've got some great opportunities here in Michigan with Karen's hired by the governor. That's exciting to me that we've got an career educator in the governor's office now. We've got some great opportunities in the state, and I'd urge you to hire Scott Menzel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Gregory Peoples, and he'll be followed by Janice Party.
It's not moving.
Good afternoon. I thank the board for allowing me this opportunity to come and address you this afternoon in support of Scott Menzel. As I said, my name is Greg Peoples. I am a 35-year resident of Ypsilanti. I have served on the Willow Run School Board, the Lincoln Consolidated School Board. I am the immediate past president of the Washington Intermediate School Board, and I'm currently a member of the board. And I want to address a question that I think John asked at the beginning of Scott's interview regarding the Willow Run Ypsilanti merger and whether or not that was something that he orchestrated to prepare him for his candidacy for the state superintendent job. And I would have to say that's nothing could be further from the truth. I was on the board, the ISD board, when we hired Scott over 3 years ago. And one of the concerns I had about Scott was his lack of experience with diverse populations. As we hired him, and we have been extremely pleased with his work in terms of the area of diversity. In terms of the merger from Willow Run and Ypsilanti, when I was on the board years ago at Willow Run, there was concern about should we consider consolidating with Ypsilanti or not. Those two communities are very, very competitive, as someone said earlier. They're very, very competitive, and the thought to consider consolidation was heretic at that point in time. It took a great deal of commitment to the students of the Ypsilanti community for Don Garrett and Dan Bates to approach me as a board president at that time to consider what we could do to consider consolidating services. And at that point in time, I suggested they move to talk with Scott Menzel, who was our superintendent. Our board was very, very supportive of not only the Ypsilanti and Willow Run communities, but Scott as well. It took an awful lot of discussion on the part of our board whether or not we wanted to enter into the work that we knew was going to be monumental with that consolidation. We agreed to do that. Once the ISD appointed the new board, we continued to work very closely with them. At the time they were about to select their superintendent, because we had invested so much into the community and to the consolidation, we felt that we had to make sure that we continued to ensure the success of this initial consolidation. And that's why, again, Scott came to us and said to the board, if you are not committed to having me do this, I won't do it. The board overwhelmingly, unanimously considered, yes, we will have to support this venture. Scott did such a tremendous job convincing, with the support of others, the Ypsilanti community to pass the vote by 61%. That he was asked to be the keynote speaker at one of the largest black churches in Ypsilanti at the Brotherhood Banquet. And after he presented at the Brotherhood Banquet, the assistant pastor came up to him and said, if we had our paperwork here, we would ordain you as a minister right now. So,
Thank you.
thank you. I support that.
All right. Janice Party. And she will be followed by Lori Tubergren Clark.
Hi, I was here last year, speaking about National Board. I am a National Board certified teacher. I taught for 40 years in Whitmore Lake. I retired 5 years ago, thanks to the incentive offered by the state. But I've continued to be involved in education. I'll tell you, that was the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. I'm here to stand for Scott Menzel. He is a man of the highest integrity. I worked with him for 5 years and I never caught him in a lie. And that's a lot to say when you're in negotiations with someone. Now, there weren't always times that he told me exactly everything I might wanted to know, but he told me enough, and we collaborated and worked together. When he started in Whitmore Lake, we had a paid bargainer. We had been negotiating for many months, and nothing was happening, and there was a lot of animosity. When Scott came on board, within weeks, we had a contract because he took over. And he was the new guy, but he recognized that need to get the staff together. He was always collaborative with the union in that if there were issues, he would come to us and say, what can we do to work this out? And it was collaborative. He made sure that teachers had mentors. First-year teachers were never left alone. They were given someone to help them out and help them navigate the way. I have this whole list, so. One of the things that he always could anticipate the problems. And you know the proverb about eating the elephant, you do it at a bite at a time. But he knew strategically where to start. It wasn't like, well, we'll take an ear, we'll take a trunk, we'll take a bite out of the butt, we'll do whatever. It was where it was most important to start. And he took some legacy costs that were in our contract and helped us work them out and find a way to make it best for kids, always protecting the core, the instruction of children in the district. And he believed in inclusive schools. Our schools were fully inclusive. We had children with multiple disabilities included in our classrooms, and Scott always made sure that those children were represented, as well as children at the top. He tried to guarantee programs of enrichment so that children would always be learning. In the area of curriculum, we were struggling with curriculum. He helped us bring in outside experts to work with our teachers, but they weren't there to tell us what to do. They were collaborative. That's what he insisted on, that there was collaboration at every level, recognizing the good that people do. And that's one of his greatest strengths, is he does not micromanage. He believes in the people that he works with. And I think that that is probably one of his greatest assets, is that he puts the people to work, he follows up on what they're doing, but he believes in his staff. So thank you for considering Scott for this position.
Our next speaker is Lori Tubergen Clark, and she'll be followed by Michelle Charvan-Witt. Feel free to correct me if I say your
You
name.
were really, really close.
Tell us your true
my
name.
My name is Lori Tubergen Clark. I am the superintendent of Nueco County RESA. I have the privilege to co-chair the MAISA Early Childhood Committee with Scott. And since 2007, I have observed Scott as just a true leader, but more than that, a lifelong learner. And a couple of the things that I think set Scott apart, and I wrote to some of you, and I have to say I was very impressed that I got personal notes back. So that's a real credit to this state board. That takes some time. He is truly the only remaining candidate that I think has the cradle to career spectrum, and he talked a little bit about that. Watching him at our early childhood meetings, and I have to give you a picture of that because it's not a committee of 12 ISD service providers. It is a committee of 50, and there's every partner that you can imagine at the table. And I'm amazed at Scott because he can call every single person by name as we go around that room. He is masterful at building that relational capacity
and masterful at thinking about the entire system. So I always tell him when I grow up, I want to be just like him. So he's been a great role model, a great help. And then as you think about his time in Michigan Works, you think about his time at the ISD, you think about his time in K-12, he really is a candidate that gets it from early childhood all the way through the career readiness. And the second thing that I think really sets him apart is, I'm from Newaygo County. Newaygo County is very rural. It's pretty impoverished. I've spent 50-some years there. And I really resonate with Scott when he talks about equity. I just applaud that stance. I support that. But he understands rural. He talked about where he grew up. He understands urban. He understands local districts. He understands ISDs. And I think that perspective of the entire system, because of all of those experiences he has, is really going to help him in creating a system that is going to be equitable and adequate for all kids. Probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now, he must have got up very early because Senator Hansen was going to have a meeting with me. And I said, we're going to talk about early childhood. He said, I'd love to come over. I said, great. So I got up early, drove across the state, met with Senator Hansen, had a great conversation. And afterwards, I just said to him, why do you want that job? Speaking of the state superintendent. And his answer was, it's to impact 1.5 million kids. And I saw that passion, and I've seen that since 2007 when I met Scott, but it's coming from his heart, and that's why you need him. That's why we all need him. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Michelle Charvon-Witt, and she will be followed by Pam Westmeyer.
Hi, my name is Michelle Sharon Witt, and I'm a program consultant for the Livingston Intermediate School District. I've taught for 35 years. I also consult in all the local school districts in Livingston County, and I'm co-president of our union. So it's been a privilege to work with Scott all these years. He's probably one of the most collaborative administrators I've ever worked with. I've seen quite a few in my day. And it's interesting to hear the term ambition used when talking about him, and I understand the question. I always consider ambition in his sense as being passion. And I think skill set was a good term when talking about him, because I've never seen a person build consensus like he has and develop those personal relationships that give weight to that consensus. I witnessed it when we worked on strategic planning in our district, when we tried to unify the county on a unified vision, and he included transportation, secretaries, everybody. And it made our whole staff feel empowered and like we were sharing the same vision. From a union perspective, we went through some of the toughest economic cuts. And again, he collaborated on that with us. We did layoffs, and it was probably the most respectful process that we had ever walked through. And while some staff were very sad when they lost their jobs, they felt respected. And that was really powerful to us. And so our agency really admires him. The only personal agenda I ever saw him push is we had to name our media room the Spartan Room.
That's an issue.
Pam Westmeyer is next, and she'll be followed by Gregory Myers.
Hi, my name's Pam Westmeyer. I am a retired person who worked for LESA. I was co-president with Michelle with the union. And I was thinking about Scott the other night, and there were just so many adjectives that I could have for him. And they were all brought up today. This is a man who not only listens, but he's a doer. When we would meet with him, and having met with other in the past, because we had been union co-presidents for a number of years, you would talk with them, they would nod their head, and then you hopefully would see them again. But with Scott, when you would meet with him and you would voice your concerns, he met with us and would come back with ideas, collaboration, how can we help everyone in this situation. That was the nuance that I found so refreshing with him. And again, he's just gone on to do wonderful things. And I personally love the new name because I'm a Sparty.
Gregory Myers, please.
Thank you. My name is Gregory Myers. I live in Ypsilanti. I was part of the last school board at Willow Run, and I was appointed as on the first board for Ypsilanti Community Schools. This is a little bit intimidating. I was going to have my daughter come sit up here with me because I know she'll go home with me. Anyway, I'm here to I'm fully persuaded that Scott Menzel should be the next state superintendent because of his vision, his ability to, oh, thank you, Patrice. His ability to bring people together, his ability to, he built a relationship with me. I didn't know him 3 years ago, and he built a relationship with me. And he brought vision to the district. The vision was to be the first choice for an exceptional cradle-to-career education. Those words never were spoken in the city of Ypsilanti before, never. And he brought that. High expectations for all students. He's trying to close the achievement gap. The reason I drove an hour and a half in my van that has 250,000 miles on it is so that I could speak on behalf of Scott Menzel. This is my oldest daughter, Patrice, and she's 10 and she's at Weimar. It's an international baccalaureate program in Ypsilanti. Y-High is connected to that. Both of those schools would not have been inside the city limits of Ypsilanti if it wasn't for the leadership of Scott Menzel. I envisioned her going through that school and going off to college and going to Harvard, Michigan, Yale, wherever she wants to go. I can see it. And I'll just tell you also, I'll share also, I don't have the highest paying job. I make $11.75 an hour. I am supposed to be at work right now. I'm cutting half a day's pay, and I'm doing it because I believe in that man out there. I believe he can change 1.5 million kids in Michigan. When I was on the board, the only reason I was on it, I didn't want to be a politician. Did not. But everybody just saw my heart. And I have 4 kids, but when I became on the school board, I had 6,000 kids. And that's why I connect with Scott, because of his heart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a public participation form? I have a form here from Representative Adam Zemke. He had to leave for session. He has given me a written letter, which I will distribute to members of the board. Thank you for your participation.
Great. Thank you all for coming and for participating.
Can we have that letter read, please?
Okay.
I think, didn't we already
Yes.
receive it?
We already received it from Adam.
But I would like the public to hear it.
I think we normally don't do that, Lupe, with public participation, but there's a very strong letter of support from Adam Zemke and the other representatives who are in attendance here. So we'll make it available to the board. And it already was sent to us by the board. So.
But the people are not going to get to hear it.
Well,
We've received a
unfortunately,
lot of feedback
right.
from a lot of people that.
But this is a testimony. This is a
we
testimony.
received a lot of testimony from a lot of people for all our candidates, and Scott certainly has a very strong group of supporters and testifiers, as you can see. So I think it would be, anyway, so that we'll continue to move on. I appreciate your point, but we do not normally read the letters, so we respect the facts that people testify. I'm not trying to discourage, I'm just trying to be even-handed in all our treatment. So we have a terrific group of finalists, as you've heard. So I think we're going to now take a break for 10 minutes or so. We'll reconvene at 3 o'clock. What we'll do next is, my colleagues are aware, is we'll begin to, each of us reflect on all the candidates, and then we'll begin to see where our preferences lie based on all we've heard, all we've learned, and all that we've benefited from in their interviews today. So we'll start back up at 3 o'clock. Thank you.